You think Christmas desserts from the 1960s and 70s were just fruitcake and cookies? Think again. Kitchens across America turned out elaborate sweets requiring days of preparation and skills passed down for generations. Let's dig into 30 Christmas desserts that have vanished from holiday tables. Ribbon candy was the crown jewel of every Christmas candy dish. Those impossibly thin strips of sugar pulled and folded into delicate waves that shimmered like stained glass. Making it required heating sugar syrup to precisely 300 degrees, then working quickly on marble slabs as the candy cooled just enough to handle. Skilled candy makers would stretch and fold the hot sugar, creating those signature ripples while incorporating festive colors of red, green, and white. The finished ribbons were fragile and beautiful, breaking with a satisfying snap that released bursts of peppermint or wintergreen. During the 1960s and 70s, specialty candy shops in every small town produced ribbon candy by hand, filling storefronts with dazzling displays. Families purchased pounds of it, arranging delicate pieces in crystal dishes that sat on coffee tables throughout the season. The skill required to make ribbon candy has nearly vanished, and today's mass-produced versions lack the ethereal thinness that made handmade ribbon candy special. Divinity was that cloud-like confection appearing on Christmas cookie trays throughout the South and Midwest, a fluffy white candy that seemed to melt on the tongue before you could taste it. Making Divinity required perfect timing and dry weather. Humidity could turn a batch into sticky failure. Grandmothers would boil sugar syrup while beating egg whites to stiff peaks, then slowly pour the hot syrup into the whites while continuing to beat until the mixture held its shape. The candy was dropped by spoonfuls onto waxed paper, each piece a little cloud dotted with chopped pecans. Some families added peppermint extract for Christmas, tinting batches pale pink or green. The process demanded patience that couldn't be rushed, often taking 30 minutes of continuous beating. Children would hover nearby, waiting to lick the beaters clean. Divinity was fragile and didn't travel well, making it a true homemade treasure. The candy represented the time and care that went into Christmas preparations. Date nut roll was that glossy cylinder wrapped in waxed paper appearing in refrigerators during December, a dense and chewy confection tasting like concentrated Christmas. The candy started with chopped dates cooked with sugar until thick, then mixed with butter, rice cereal, and mountains of chopped walnuts or pecans. While still warm, the mixture was shaped into logs, rolled in powdered sugar or coconut, then wrapped tightly and chilled until firm enough to slice into neat rounds. Each slice revealed a mosaic of nuts and golden dates, the texture somewhere between fudge and taffy. Department stores like Neiman Marcus became famous for holiday date nut rolls, but most families had cherished recipes passed down through generations. The rolls kept well for weeks, making them practical gifts prepared ahead of the holiday rush. Children often found them too sophisticated, leaving more for adults who savored their complex sweetness. Date nut rolls represented a time when Christmas candy meant more than chocolate. Steamed plum pudding was the dramatic finale to Christmas dinner. That dark, dense dome carried flaming to the table with brandy blazing blue around its edges. Making one properly took weeks, starting with dried fruits soaked in brandy until they swelled with boozy sweetness. The batter combined suet, real beef fat giving the pudding its distinctive richness, with breadcrumbs, flour, eggs, and pounds of currants, raisins, and candied peel. The mixture was packed into ceramic molds and steamed for hours until the kitchen filled with the scent of spices and spirits. Traditional families made their puddings on Stir-Up Sunday, 5 weeks before Christmas, allowing time for flavors to mature. The reheating on Christmas Day required several more hours of steaming before the grand presentation. Hard sauce, butter beaten with powdered sugar and brandy, melted into pools around each slice. The pudding was so rich that small portions satisfied, meaning one could serve the entire family. Charlotte Roose was that elegant molded dessert appearing at fancy Christmas parties, a tower of Bavarian cream surrounded by ladyfingers and crowned with whipped cream rosettes. The preparation required making custard from scratch, folding in whipped cream and gelatin, then carefully lining a mold with ladyfingers before filling it with the cream mixture. The dessert had to chill for hours until set, then came the nerve-wracking moment of unmolding, a successful release revealing a perfect striped tower, while failure meant a collapsed mess. Bakeries in cities sold individual charlottes in paper cups, but the homemade version was the showpiece of Christmas buffets during the 1960s. Hostesses would dust the top with powdered sugar to look like snow or pipe elaborate whipped cream decorations in red and green. Charlotte Roose required skills home cooks once practiced regularly, making proper custard, whipping cream by hand, and working with gelatin. As these techniques faded from common knowledge, so did this graceful dessert. Pfeffernusse were those small, round German spice cookies appearing in tins throughout December, their name meaning pepper nuts despite containing no actual nuts. The dough was dense with honey, molasses, and a complex blend of spices including white pepper, anise, cardamom, and cloves that gave them their distinctive bite. Baked until firm, the cookies were rolled in powdered sugar while still warm, creating a crackled coating that contrasted with the dark spiced interior. Unlike soft American cookies, Pfeffernusse were meant to be hard. Almost too hard when fresh, they softened over days as the spices mellowed. German and Dutch immigrant families brought these recipes to America, where they became traditions in communities from Pennsylvania to the Midwest. The cookies kept for weeks in tins, improving with age as flavors married. Children often found them strange at first, but grew to crave them as adults. Making Pfeffernusse meant connecting to old-world traditions, honoring ancestors who carried recipes across oceans. Springerle were those pale, embossed German cookies that looked almost too beautiful to eat, their surfaces pressed with intricate designs of flowers, animals, and Christmas scenes. The dough was simple: eggs, sugar, flour, and anise, but the technique was exacting, requiring the dough to be rolled, pressed with carved wooden molds, then left to dry overnight before baking. This drying step was crucial, allowing designs to set so they remained sharp after baking. The finished cookies were pale ivory with designs standing in relief like cameos. Families treasured their Springerle molds, carved wooden boards passed down through generations, each one a piece of folk art. The cookies were hard and dry, meant for dunking in coffee, their anise flavor intensifying over weeks of storage. Making Springerle required patience that modern cooks rarely possess: the overnight drying, the gentle handling, the precise temperature control. These cookies represented craftsmanship and a willingness to spend hours creating something beautiful. Sugar plums were those mysterious confections immortalized in holiday stories, yet few modern cooks could tell you what they actually were. Real sugar plums were handmade candies consisting of nuts or dried fruit coated in layer after layer of sugar syrup, each coat applied and dried before the next, until the center was encased in a smooth shell. The process took days of patient work, dipping and drying repeatedly, until the sugar plums reached proper size and glossy finish. Inside might be an almond, candied ginger, or a spiced prune, each variety a different flavor surprise. During the Victorian era and into the mid-20th century, confectioners made sugar plums in quantities for Christmas, selling them wrapped in tissue paper. The vision of sugar plums dancing required knowing what they were: jewel-like candies in pink, green, and white that caught light like precious stones. As commercial candy took over, the art of making sugar plums faded, leaving only the name behind. What was once a beloved confection became merely a word. Hard sauce was the essential accompaniment to steamed puddings, a simple mixture of butter, powdered sugar, and brandy beaten until light and fluffy, then chilled until firm. The name was misleading. Hard sauce wasn't a sauce at all, but a flavored butter that melted into silky pools when spooned onto warm pudding. Making it required beating butter until nearly white, gradually incorporating sugar and spirits until the mixture could be piped into decorative shapes. Some families added nutmeg or vanilla, others used rum or whiskey instead of brandy, each household developing their signature version. The sauce was made ahead and refrigerated, sometimes for weeks, allowing flavors to meld. At the Christmas table, hard sauce was presented in a pretty dish with its own small spoon, passed around for each guest. Children often found the brandy too strong, but adults savored how cold butter melted against hot pudding. Without hard sauce, steamed pudding was incomplete. Yet today, few cooks know this classic even exists. Candied citrus peel was the jewel-like garnish decorating Christmas cakes and cookies. Strips of orange, lemon, and grapefruit rind transformed through days of simmering into translucent, sugar-crusted confections. The process began by scoring citrus rinds and soaking them in water for days, changing the water repeatedly to remove bitterness. Then came slow simmering in increasingly concentrated sugar syrups, the peels gradually absorbing sweetness while maintaining their shape. The final step was drying, either air-dried on racks or rolled in granulated sugar for a crystalline coating. The finished peels could be dipped in chocolate, chopped into fruitcakes, or eaten as candy, each piece a concentrated burst of citrus tempered by sweetness. During the 1960s, no Christmas fruitcake was complete without homemade candied peel. Making it required unhurried time that Christmas preparations once demanded, days of attention and watching the transformation happen. The peels kept for months, allowing cooks to prepare them well in advance. Mincemeat pie was the quintessential Victorian Christmas dessert that lingered on American tables well into the 1970s, its filling a mysterious mixture of dried fruits, spices, suet, and sometimes actual meat. Traditional recipes called for beef or venison mixed with apples, raisins, currants, and candied peel, all preserved in brandy for months. The preparation began in autumn, allowing flavors to marry before the holidays. Grandmothers packed the mixture into crocks, topping up with more brandy as weeks passed. The filling was spooned into pastry shells and baked until the crust turned golden and filling bubbled through decorative slits. Each slice revealed dark, jeweled fruit suspended in rich, boozy syrup. Children often rejected mincemeat pie as too strange, while adults savored its complex flavors that spoke of centuries-old traditions. By the 1980s, most families had abandoned the authentic version for jarred substitutes, losing the depth that only months of aging could provide. Nestle Road Pie was the glamorous frozen dessert that graced holiday tables from the 1940s through the 1970s, a Baroque confection of chestnut cream, candied fruits, and maraschino cherries frozen in a crumb crust. Named after a Russian diplomat, it became fashionable in American restaurants before home cooks adapted it for Christmas entertaining. Making it required cooking chestnuts until soft, pressing them through a sieve, folding the puree into whipped cream along with rum-soaked fruits. The mixture was poured into a graham cracker crust and frozen until firm, then topped with more whipped cream and candied fruit. The flavor was sophisticated and unusual, the chestnuts providing earthy sweetness unlike any other dessert. Department store restaurants made Nestle Road Pie famous, and home cooks struggled to replicate its elegance. The dessert disappeared as chestnuts became harder to find and frozen desserts fell from fashion. Today, few remember this once celebrated creation that represented holiday entertaining at its most refined. Yule log cake was the showpiece of Christmas desserts, a chocolate sponge rolled around cream filling and decorated to resemble a bark-covered log complete with meringue mushrooms and marzipan holly. French in origin, the bûche de Noël became an American tradition during the mid-20th century when elegant entertaining reached its peak. Making one required rolling warm sponge cake without cracking it, a technique demanding practice and confidence. The cake was spread with buttercream or whipped cream, rolled tightly, then frosted with chocolate dragged with a fork to simulate bark. Decorators added knots and branch stubs, dusted everything with powdered sugar snow, and arranged tiny meringue mushrooms. The presentation was theatrical, carried to the table whole, then sliced to reveal the spiral inside. Bakeries charged premium prices for Yule logs, but ambitious home bakers tackled them as Christmas Eve projects. The cake combined artistry with flavor in ways modern desserts rarely attempt. Lebkuchen were those soft, spiced German cookies that arrived in decorative tins each Christmas, their tops glazed white and their bottoms covered in edible paper called Oblaten. Unlike hard gingerbread, Lebkuchen were meant to be chewy and moist, dense with honey, almonds, and a complex blend of spices that included cardamom, coriander, and anise. German bakeries had perfected these cookies over centuries, and immigrant families brought recipes to America, where Lebkuchen became Christmas traditions in communities from Wisconsin to Texas. The dough was made weeks in advance, stored in crocks to ripen before being cut and baked. The characteristic glaze was made from powdered sugar and water, painted on while cookies were still warm so it dried to a crackled finish. Families would order tins from German specialty shops or make their own following handwritten recipes. Lebkuchen kept for months when stored properly, improving with age as the spices mellowed into harmony. Stollen was that dense, fruit-studded German bread that appeared wrapped in foil on Christmas morning, its butter-rich dough concealing a tunnel of marzipan running through its center. Making authentic Stollen required starting weeks ahead, soaking dried fruits in rum until they plumped with boozy sweetness. The yeast dough was rich with butter and eggs, folded around candied citrus, almonds, and the precious marzipan log before being shaped into its distinctive oval. After baking, the Stollen was brushed with melted butter and buried under drifts of powdered sugar that created its characteristic white appearance. Traditional families made several loaves, wrapping them tightly and allowing them to age for weeks. Each slice revealed the spiral of marzipan surrounded by jeweled fruit, the texture somewhere between bread and cake. German bakeries in cities sold authentic Stollen at premium prices, while home bakers attempted their own versions. The time and technique required kept Stollen rare, a true Christmas luxury. Bourbon balls were the adult confection found on every Southern cookie tray, those no-bake treats that packed a spirited punch beneath their chocolate coating. The recipe was elegantly simple: crushed vanilla wafers mixed with cocoa, powdered sugar, corn syrup, and generous amounts of Kentucky bourbon, then rolled into balls and coated in powdered sugar or chocolate. No cooking was required, making them perfect for busy holiday schedules, though they needed days of aging for flavors to meld. The bourbon mellowed as the balls rested, transforming from harsh to smooth while permeating every bite with warm, oaky sweetness. Ladies made batches in their kitchens, storing them in tins between layers of waxed paper. The treats were not for children, though teenagers sometimes snuck them from platters. Bourbon balls represented a genteel form of indulgence, strong enough to notice but respectable enough for church socials. They've never entirely disappeared but are rarely made with the same generous pour. Opera fudge was the sophisticated cousin of ordinary fudge, a creamy confection made with brown sugar and cream that achieved a texture more like fondant than the grainy chocolate version. The name suggested elegance, and indeed opera fudge appeared at the fanciest holiday gatherings during the mid-20th century. Making it required a candy thermometer and patience, cooking the sugar mixture to precise temperatures while stirring constantly. The hot candy was poured onto marble slabs and worked with paddles until it turned from glossy to matte, from liquid to plastic. Flavored with vanilla and studded with black walnuts, each piece was a study in buttery sweetness with complexity to seem refined. Confectionery shops sold opera fudge in beautiful boxes, but dedicated candy makers took pride in producing their own. The technique was demanding. Cook too long and the fudge turned grainy, not long enough and it never set. When made properly, opera fudge melted on the tongue like a whispered secret. Coconut bonbons were those snow-white confections appearing in Christmas candy assortments, their creamy centers encased in shredded coconut that made them look like tiny snowballs. The centers were made from sweetened condensed milk mixed with powdered sugar and butter, flavored with vanilla or almond extract, then chilled until firm enough to shape. Each ball was rolled in flaked coconut, sometimes toasted for extra flavor, creating textural contrast between smooth interior and chewy exterior. Some families dipped bonbons in chocolate before the coconut coating, creating striped interiors when sliced. The candy was simple enough for children to help make, their small hands rolling sticky centers while adults managed the coating. Coconut bonbons kept well in refrigerators, making them ideal when candy dishes needed constant refilling. The flavor was pure, sweet comfort. Nothing sophisticated, just honest pleasure of coconut and cream. They've been replaced by commercial coconut candies that lack homemade tenderness. Tutti Frutti candy was that rainbow-colored confection made by preserving fruits in brandy throughout the year. Each season's harvest added to a crock that became Christmas treasure. The process began in spring with strawberries, continued through summer with cherries and peaches, and finished in fall with pears and grapes, each addition accompanied by sugar and spirits. The crock sat in a cool place, occasionally stirred, the fruit slowly breaking down into jeweled conserve tasting of concentrated summer. At Christmas, the Tutti Frutti was spooned over ice cream, pound cake, or eaten straight as a boozy treat for adults. Some families kept their crocks going for years, the flavor deepening with each passing season. The tradition required forethought that modern cooks rarely possess, remembering to add each fruit at its peak, maintaining proper ratios. Tutti Frutti represented the old way of cooking when preparing for Christmas began in spring, and patience was an essential ingredient. Anise cookies were those licorice-scented treats that divided holiday gatherings into lovers and haters. Their distinctive flavor and acquired taste that generations of European-American families cherished. The dough was simple: butter, sugar, eggs, flour, but the anise seeds or extract transformed it into something polarizing and memorable. Italian families made anisette cookies glazed with white icing, while German households preferred their anise cookies crisp and plain. The aroma of baking anise cookies was unmistakable, filling homes with a scent that signaled Christmas as surely as pine trees. Children often rejected them initially, then grew to crave them as adults when the flavor meant memory and tradition. The cookies kept for weeks in tins, their anise flavor intensifying rather than fading. Bakers made enormous batches, knowing anise cookies were meant for the entire season rather than immediate consumption. Though supermarket cookies have pushed homemade versions aside, dedicated families still carry on the tradition. Panocha was that creamy brown sugar fudge that appeared on holiday candy plates, its caramel-like flavor setting it apart from ordinary chocolate versions. The name came from a Mexican-Spanish word for raw sugar, and the candy had roots in both Latin American and New England traditions. Making panocha required cooking brown sugar with cream or milk to the soft ball stage, then beating the mixture until it lost its gloss and thickened enough to pour into pans. The result was smooth and creamy with a deep butterscotch flavor that lingered on the tongue. Chopped walnuts or pecans were often folded in, their crunch contrasting with the silky candy. Panocha was considered more sophisticated than chocolate fudge, appearing at ladies' luncheons and holiday open houses. The technique was tricky. Undercook it and the candy never set, overcook it and the texture turned grainy. Home candy makers took pride in achieving perfect panocha, its golden color and complex sweetness proof of their skill. Flammkuchen was that German plum cake that appeared during the Christmas season, its buttery base covered with halved plums arranged in neat rows and dusted with cinnamon sugar. The cake was simple but required good technique. A tender yeasted dough pressed into a pan, then covered with ripe purple plums cut side up so their juices soaked into the cake as it baked. The edges of the plums caramelized while the center stayed soft, creating contrast in every bite. German immigrant families made this cake for Sunday coffee hour during the holidays, serving thick slices with whipped cream. The recipe traveled from Bavaria and Saxony to American communities in Wisconsin, Texas, and Pennsylvania. By December, fresh plums were gone, so families used preserved or canned fruit, though purists insisted the cake was best in late summer. Flammkuchen represented the practical German approach to baking, simple ingredients combined with care to create something memorable. Fruit and nut balls were those dense confections rolled in coconut or powdered sugar that appeared on every church cookie exchange plate during the holidays. The mixture combined ground-dried fruits, dates, figs, raisins, with chopped nuts and sometimes graham cracker crumbs, bound together with honey or corn syrup. No baking was required, making them perfect for busy December schedules when oven space was precious. The balls were rolled by hand, each one slightly different, then coated in coconut, powdered sugar, or finely chopped nuts. The flavor was intensely fruity and sweet, concentrated enough that one or two satisfied. Children could help make them, their small hands perfect for rolling the sticky mixture into uniform spheres. Fruit and nut balls kept for weeks in tins, their flavors melding and improving over time. They represented the practical approach to holiday candy, wholesome ingredients, no special equipment, and results that looked impressive despite their simplicity. Kolachi were those Czech pastries that appeared in bakeries and home kitchens during the Christmas season. Their soft, yeasted dough holding pools of fruit filling or sweetened farmer cheese. The dough was rich with butter and eggs, rolled into small rounds and pressed in the center to create wells for the filling. Traditional fillings included prune, poppy seed, apricot, and a sweetened cheese mixture that was almost like cheesecake. Czech immigrant communities in Texas and Nebraska made kolachi for every holiday, but Christmas brought the most elaborate versions. The pastries were arranged on platters, their colorful fillings creating a mosaic effect that made tables look festive. Making kolache required patience. The dough needed proper rising, the fillings careful preparation. Each family had their signature recipes, guarded and passed down through generations. The pastries were meant for sharing, brought to church gatherings and neighborhood parties. Marzipan fruits were those tiny sculptured candies shaped and painted to look like miniature apples, pears, bananas, and oranges, displayed in boxes or arranged on dessert platters. The marzipan was made from ground almonds and sugar, kneaded until smooth and pliable enough to shape by hand. Food coloring was painted on with tiny brushes, building layers to create realistic shading, red blushing into yellow on apples, green stems on oranges. European confectioners had perfected this art over centuries, and American home cooks attempted simpler versions during the Christmas season. The candies were more decorative than practical, often too beautiful to eat. Children would admire them in candy shop windows, memorizing which fruits they would choose when finally allowed to pick. Marzipan fruits represented the artistic side of holiday baking, where flavor was secondary to appearance and the goal was creating miniature works of edible art. Buttermints were those smooth, creamy candies that melted on the tongue, their pastel colors filling cut glass dishes at every holiday gathering. The recipe combined butter, powdered sugar, and peppermint extract into a dough shaped into small pillows or pressed into molds. Professional versions used fondant, but home cooks adapted with cream cheese for easier handling. The candies needed to set overnight, their texture firming while remaining tender enough to dissolve slowly. Buttermints were considered refined candy, appropriate for wedding receptions and church teas as well as Christmas parties. They kept well in tins for holiday gift-giving. The pastel colors could match any decorating scheme, and creative cooks shaped them into trees, bells, or wreaths. Buttermints represented a gentler era when elegance mattered as much as sweetness. Popcorn balls were those sticky sweet spheres that appeared at Christmas parties and were tucked into stockings, their buttery caramel coating holding popped corn in tight formations. Making them required cooking sugar and butter to the right temperature, then quickly tossing in popcorn and shaping the mixture while still warm enough to mold. The timing was crucial. Too hot and the balls fell apart, too cool and they wouldn't stick. Red and green food coloring turned plain popcorn balls festive, while some added peanuts for variety. Children loved receiving popcorn balls, their impressive size and satisfying sweetness making them special treats. Schools and churches made them for fundraisers, wrapping each in cellophane tied with ribbon. Popcorn balls represented American ingenuity, transforming a simple snack into holiday candy through sugar and skill. Rum balls were the elegant cousin of bourbon balls, their chocolate coating hiding a potent mixture of cake crumbs, cocoa, and dark rum that improved with age. Unlike bourbon balls using cookie crumbs, traditional rum balls started with leftover cake ground fine and mixed with cocoa, corn syrup, and generous amounts of dark rum. The mixture was rolled into balls, then coated in chocolate sprinkles or cocoa powder. They needed at least a week of aging, the rum mellowing while permeating every crumb. Rum balls appeared on holiday candy trays alongside their bourbon cousins, representing different regional preferences. Caribbean and European influences shaped rum ball recipes, while Southern traditions favored bourbon. The candies were strictly for adults, their alcohol content significant. Making rum balls was a clever way to use cake scraps while creating sophisticated candy. Snowball cookies were those tender, crumbly confections rolled in powdered sugar until they looked like tiny snowdrifts, their buttery interiors hiding chopped pecans or walnuts. Known by many names, Russian tea cakes, Mexican wedding cookies, butterballs, they appeared on every Christmas cookie tray. The dough was simple: butter, powdered sugar, flour, and nuts, mixed until combined and shaped into small balls. After baking, cookies were rolled in powdered sugar while warm, then rolled again after cooling for a thick coating. The texture was unique, sandy and tender, dissolving on the tongue while leaving buttery sweetness and nutty crunch. Every family had their version, some adding vanilla, others almond extract. Snowball cookies represented Christmas baking at its most approachable: simple ingredients, forgiving technique, and delightful results. Fruitcake cookies were the approachable version of traditional fruitcake, offering the same jeweled fruits and nuts in a format even skeptics could appreciate. The dough was rich with butter and brown sugar, studded with candied cherries, pineapple, citron, and generous handfuls of pecans or walnuts. Unlike dense loaves requiring weeks of aging, these cookies baked quickly and could be eaten fresh. The cookies were drop-style, their rustic shapes showing off colorful fruits within. They kept well in tins, perfect for gift-giving. Some recipes included bourbon for depth, while others relied on vanilla and spices. Fruitcake cookies appeared when traditional fruitcake fell from favor, offering a compromise that preserved beloved flavors while abandoning the format. They proved that the best traditions adapt. Coconut custard pie was the quiet heartbeat of Southern holiday tables, a dessert that won people over without needing decoration or fuss. It came from the simplest ingredients: eggs, milk, sugar, shredded coconut, and vanilla. As it baked, the custard settled low while the coconut rose and turned golden, creating a pie that tasted warm and familiar. Families loved it because it brought sunshine to a cold season and reminded them of childhood afternoons. It showed up at potlucks and Thanksgiving dinners long before more elaborate desserts became popular. Older cooks trusted it because it never failed, even in lean years. But as store-bought pies and trendier flavors crowded the table, this humble favorite faded. People forgot how satisfying a soft custard and toasted coconut could be. Still, in homes where old recipes survive, this pie remains a gentle reminder of slower holidays and simple comfort. Putting walnuts in the stuffing was one of Grandma's little signatures, a small detail that turned her dish into something unmistakably hers. She would crush the walnuts by hand, just enough to give them texture without overpowering the rest of the ingredients. Then she folded them into the mixture with an ease that came from years of perfecting her craft. The moment that stuffing hit the oven, the warm, nutty smell drifted through the house, subtle but unforgettable. At the table, the walnuts added a quiet crunch that surprised people who forgot she always used them. They blended perfectly with the sage, broth, and cornbread, adding depth no boxed version could match. That handful of walnuts was more than just flavor. It was Grandma's way of marking the dish as her own, a reminder that even the smallest choices could carry a piece of memory. Plum pudding arrived at Christmas tables wreathed in blue flames, brandy burning dramatically as families gathered to witness the spectacle. This dense, dark pudding contained no plums at all. The name referred to raisins, which were once called plums in England. The batter combined sweet breadcrumbs, flour, dried fruits, nuts, and enough brandy to preserve it for months. Families steamed the pudding for hours in cloth-wrapped molds, then aged it like fruitcake for optimal flavor. On Christmas Day, the pudding was reheated, doused with warmed brandy, and set alight before being carried ceremoniously to the table. Hidden inside were silver coins or charms that promised luck to whoever found them in their slice. The tradition required advanced planning and genuine skill, making it impractical for modern, rushed households. Plum pudding represented the pinnacle of Victorian Christmas celebration, a dessert that demanded reverence. Timing the meal around family instead of the clock was one of Grandma's gentle rules, something she believed in more strongly than any recipe. If one person was running late, the carving knife stayed on the counter. If someone called to say they were on the way, she turned the oven to warm and waited. Thanksgiving, to her, was about togetherness, not punctuality. She watched the door more than she watched the time, and when finally everyone arrived, she would smile with relief before lifting the lid on the turkey. Her patience made the meal feel like a gathering instead of a schedule. Shoofly pie was a slice of Appalachian history wrapped in a layer of sticky molasses and crumb topping, a dessert born from frugality and resourcefulness. It was called Shoofly because the sweet smell drew flies toward the table and cooks had to shoo them away as the pie cooled. Families made it because molasses was cheaper and easier to store than sugar, making it the perfect holiday ingredient for households that had more hard work than money. The pie baked into a deep, gooey layer at the bottom with a crumbly cake-like topping on top, creating a texture that felt both rustic and indulgent. Children loved it because it was sweet enough to feel forbidden, and adults enjoyed it because every bite tasted like the land they came from. Over time, as refined sugar became cheap and store-bought pies took over, Shoofly pie disappeared from most homes. It was too regional, too old-fashioned, too simple to compete with newer holiday desserts, but the people who remember it still talk about it with a quiet pride. It was a dessert that told a story, and every slice tasted a little like history. Mincemeat pie with actual meat carried centuries of English tradition into American holiday tables. The filling combined finely chopped beef or venison with suet, apples, raisins, currants, citrus peel, and a heavy pour of brandy or rum. Spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves transformed what sounds strange into something hauntingly delicious. The meat provided richness and body, while the fruit added sweetness and moisture. Families made mincemeat in enormous batches each November, jarring it for use throughout the holiday season. The alcohol preserved the mixture and mellowed the flavors over weeks of aging. Served warm with hard sauce or brandy butter, mincemeat pie was the centerpiece of Christmas Eve suppers across New England and the Mid-Atlantic. Children were given small portions, the boozy richness considered adult fare. Modern mincemeat abandoned the meat entirely, leaving behind only a pale imitation of the original. The authentic version was complex, savory sweet, and utterly unforgettable. Cooking enough food for a small army was one of Grandma's proudest Thanksgiving traditions, even though she claimed it was simply practical. She believed leftovers were part of the holiday, part of the comfort, part of the rhythm of the season. So she cooked as if the entire neighborhood might drop by at any moment. Pots simmered on every burner. Dishes crowded every countertop. The refrigerator was always filled to the back with casseroles waiting their turn in the oven. She made 2 of things most families made 1 of, and sometimes she made 3 just to be sure. People laughed and teased her about it, but they also packed leftover plates with gratitude before leaving. She knew that food carried the celebration beyond the day itself, stretching the warmth of Thanksgiving into the rest of the week. And she also knew that running out of anything would have felt disappointing, even if no one said it out loud. Her abundance was her love made visible. She cooked big because she loved big. And when everyone left with containers full of turkey, potatoes, pie, and rolls, she looked satisfied in a quiet way, like the holiday had unfolded exactly as it should. Her feast fed people long after they stood up from the table, and that was her version of perfection. Pumpkin chiffon pie was the lighter, softer cousin of the traditional pumpkin pie, a dessert so airy it felt like eating a sweet autumn cloud. It became popular when cooks wanted something elegant but not too heavy after a long day of holiday eating, and chiffon pies were considered the height of sophistication. Instead of the dense custard people are used to today, pumpkin chiffon pie relied on whipped egg whites, folded carefully into a spiced pumpkin mixture, creating a silky filling that floated inside its crust. Families loved it because it felt special, almost fancy, even when the ingredients were simple and inexpensive. Mothers would make it the night before Thanksgiving so it had time to set, and children would sneak into the refrigerator just to poke at the trembling surface. But when canned pumpkin fillings and pre-made pies started taking over in grocery stores, chiffon pies faded fast. The delicate preparation did not fit into a world rushing toward convenience. People forgot the feeling of lifting a slice that barely weighed anything, of tasting pumpkin in a way that felt light instead of heavy. The pie disappeared, replaced by versions that were simpler but far less magical. Still, anyone who ever tasted a homemade pumpkin chiffon pie will tell you that nothing has matched its airy charm since. In a holiday built on tradition, it remains one of the sweetest losses. Letting the turkey rest properly was one of those steps Grandma took seriously, even when everyone else was starving. When the turkey came out golden and steaming, hands always reached for the carving knife, but she gently stopped them every time. She covered the bird loosely and let it sit so the juices could settle back into the meat. She never rushed this part. While it rested, she checked the rolls, stirred the gravy, or finished a side dish. The kitchen moved around her, but she stayed focused on that pause she believed in so deeply. And when she finally carved the turkey, the slices came out tender and juicy, proving her point without a word. Even the hungriest person admitted the wait was worth it. That quiet patience reflected how she treated the whole holiday. She knew rushing never made anything better. Suet pudding with hard sauce was Christmas comfort food for families who valued richness over refinement. The pudding itself was simple: flour, suet, sugar, and spices steamed until dense and satisfying. What elevated it was the hard sauce, a mixture of butter, powdered sugar, and brandy beaten until fluffy and pale. The cold sauce melted slowly over warm pudding, creating rivers of boozy sweetness that soaked into every bite. Families served this after heavy Christmas dinners when something substantial was needed to conclude the feast. The suet gave the pudding a texture impossible to achieve with butter, tender yet sturdy enough to hold together. Children received smaller portions with less sauce, the brandy content making it adult territory. Making hard sauce required patience and strong arms, the butter needing thorough beating to achieve proper consistency. This dessert disappeared as sweet became difficult to source and modern tastes shifted toward lighter fare. Handwritten recipe cards pulled from a tin box were one of Grandma's most treasured tools, even though she never treated them like anything fragile. The box was old, dented, and faded, but inside lived the entire memory of her kitchen. Each card carried soft edges, smudges of flour, and notes written over years of trial and adjustment. She pulled the box down every Thanksgiving, sorting through the cards quickly until she found the right one. Sometimes she read it carefully. Other times, she just glanced, using it more as a reminder than a guide. Kids loved asking about the cards, and she always let them hold one gently, smiling as they traced the handwriting. Those cards held her patience, her practice, and the wisdom she inherited from cooks before her. No digital recipe could ever replace their warmth or their history. Every dish she made felt touched by that old tin box. Apple Pandowdy was the rustic cousin of all the fancier apple desserts, a dish that did not care about looks or presentation and still managed to win every heart at the table. It began with sliced apples simmered with cinnamon, butter, and a touch of brown sugar until the whole house smelled like the inside of an orchard. Instead of laying a perfect crust over the top, cooks would break pieces of dough and scatter them unevenly, letting the edges sink into the bubbling fruit as it baked. The juices caramelized around the dough, turning each little piece into something crisp, chewy, and irresistible. This was a dessert for families who valued flavor over perfection, people who understood that the best dishes are sometimes the messiest. Children loved it because it felt fun, like a dessert that broke the rules, and adults loved it because it tasted like the orchard harvest served straight from the pan. But as crisps and cobblers became more popular and easier to sell in bakeries, the Pandowdy quietly slipped away. Its uneven top was not camera-ready, and its old-fashioned name did not help it survive in a modern world. Still, anyone who ever ate it fresh from the oven remembers the way it tasted like fall itself, a forgotten treasure hiding in plain sight. Keeping the house warm and cozy on Thanksgiving was something Grandma did without even thinking, turning the entire home into a place that felt safe and soft. The oven warmed the kitchen, blankets lay folded on chairs, and the lighting glowed low and gentle instead of bright and harsh. Even before the food came out, The house felt like a refuge from the cold outside. People walked in and immediately relaxed, their shoulders dropping as the warmth wrapped around them. The smell of roasting turkey mixed with the faint scent of cinnamon or something sweet she always had sitting on the back burner. The windows fogged slightly from the heat, making the outside world feel far away. Grandma knew comfort was part of the meal, part of the celebration, part of what made Thanksgiving feel complete. She created that warmth as naturally as she breathed. Chess tarts for Christmas multiplied the beloved Southern chess pie into individual portions perfect for holiday gatherings. Each tart shell held the same buttery, custardy filling: eggs, sugar, butter, and a splash of vinegar that gave it distinctive tang. The tops cracked beautifully during baking, creating golden surfaces that shattered with each bite. Families baked dozens for Christmas parties, the small size allowing guests to sample without committing to full slices. The filling was simple but required precise technique to achieve the right texture, neither too runny nor too firm. Some cooks added lemon or chocolate, creating variations that filled platters with visual variety. Children could eat these without the mess of larger desserts, making them practical for holiday chaos. The tarts kept well, actually improving overnight as flavors melded. Chess tarts disappeared as store-bought cookies replaced homemade holiday treats, sacrificing craftsmanship for convenience. Serving green bean casserole the old way was one of those traditions Grandma never questioned, because she believed there was no sense in changing something that already worked. She made it exactly as she learned it, with canned green beans, that familiar can of cream soup, and the crunchy onions sprinkled on top. Nothing fancy, nothing experimental, nothing added or taken away. She stirred everything together with steady hands, poured it into her old baking dish, and slid it into the oven until the top was golden and bubbling. The smell was unmistakable, drifting through the house like a memory. When she carried it to the table, there was always at least one person who smiled and said it looked exactly the same as last year. That was the point. The comfort came from consistency, from knowing a dish would taste the way it always had. Grandma never chased trends or new versions. She believed the old way was the best way because it held the flavor of every Thanksgiving that came before, and she was right. Prune cake was one of those desserts people loved long before they ever admitted it. A moist, spiced treat that showed up on countless holiday tables thanks to its deep flavor and long shelf life. Grandmothers especially swore by it, calling it their secret weapon because it never dried out and always tasted better the next day. The prunes disappeared into the batter, lending sweetness and moisture without announcing themselves too boldly, and the spices wrapped everything in a warm, comforting aroma. It was a cake that stretched ingredients wisely, perfect for large families and tight budgets. Children would roll their eyes at the thought of prunes, but one bite of that sticky sweet crumb made them believers. It was a dessert born from practicality, the kind of treat that made the most of what people had on hand. But as times changed and holiday desserts became flashier, prune cake was left behind. It did not look glamorous, it did not have fancy toppings, and it did not fit the modern obsession with picture-perfect food. So it vanished, even though anyone who ever loved it can still taste it in their memory, a quiet classic forgotten but never truly gone. Listening to holiday music while she cooked was one of Grandma's ways of setting the tone for the entire house. She would put on a record or turn the radio to the seasonal station, letting songs drift through the rooms as she stirred, chopped, and baked. The melodies blended with the sounds of pots simmering, the oven door opening, and the quiet thud of her footsteps across the kitchen floor. It made the work feel lighter, almost cheerful. Anyone who walked through the house felt the shift in mood immediately. It was impossible not to smile when the music floated past. Boiled custard served warm in cups was Christmas Eve tradition in Southern households, a drinkable dessert that bridged the gap between eggnog and pudding. Rich with eggs, milk, sugar, and vanilla, the custard was cooked slowly over gentle heat until it thickened enough to coat a spoon. Families served it warm from heirloom cups, sometimes with a grating of nutmeg on top. The texture was silky and comforting, substantial enough to satisfy without the heaviness of solid desserts. Making boiled custard required patience and attention. Too much heat would scramble the eggs, ruining hours of work. Grandmothers passed down their techniques through demonstration, teaching daughters to recognize the exact moment the custard reached perfection. Some families added bourbon, transforming it into something approaching liquid luxury. The tradition faded as store-bought eggnog became convenient, and fewer cooks possessed the skill to execute proper custard. Boiled custard was more than dessert. It was ritual. Adding pecans to almost everything during Thanksgiving was one of those habits Grandma never explained but everyone accepted. It was part tradition, part instinct, and part quiet belief that pecans made a dish feel complete. She sprinkled them into pies, folded them into breads, and scattered them over casseroles with easy confidence. The house would fill with a soft, nutty smell, a warm aroma that felt tied to every holiday memory. She cracked some by hand, saving the biggest pieces for the top of her desserts because she cared about how they looked as much as how they tasted. Even store-bought pecans were sorted carefully, chosen like small treasures. Pecans were not just an ingredient. They were her signature, the gentle crunch that told you she had passed through the kitchen. Newer recipes came and went, but nothing replaced the comfort of finding pecans in her dishes. They were the sound, smell, and texture of Thanksgiving in her home, one sprinkle at a time. She built the feeling of the holiday. Cranberry pudding with hard sauce was one of those desserts that looked humble on the outside, but carried a surprising punch once you cut into it. This steamed pudding was dense, tart, and beautifully old-fashioned, the kind of dish families made before ovens were common in every home. The cranberries gave it a deep ruby color and a sharpness that cut through the heaviness of a Thanksgiving meal, and it always arrived at the table warm enough to fog up the windows. But the real magic came from the hard sauce, a thick mixture of butter, sugar, and a touch of something strong enough to make everyone at the table raise their eyebrows just a bit. When you dolloped it over the pudding, it melted slowly, seeping into every corner and creating a flavor no modern dessert can truly imitate. Families made this because it felt festive, grown up, and cozy all at once, a dessert that lit up the room even without frosting or decorations. Over time, the steaming process fell out of fashion, and people traded long cooking times for convenience. Microwaves replaced kettles, boxed mixes replaced handwritten recipes, and the pudding slipped quietly into obscurity. But the truth is, a dessert like this was never about convenience. It was about gathering in the kitchen, checking the pot, waiting together, and finally sharing something warm and indulgent on a cold holiday night, a forgotten classic, but one with a heart that has never really disappeared. Cranberry orange relish with walnuts was Thanksgiving brightness in its purest form. Before canned cranberry sauce became a staple, families would grind fresh cranberries with whole oranges, peel and all, mixing in chopped walnuts and sugar until it glowed ruby red. The result was tart, sweet, and bursting with freshness, a contrast to the rich, heavy dishes around it. Every spoonful was alive with flavor and texture, a mix of crunch and tang that woke up the palate. Prepared by hand, often with a hand-cranked grinder, it carried the satisfaction of true craftsmanship. It wasn't molded or uniform. It was vivid and real, a reflection of the season's bounty. Though it's been replaced by smooth, canned versions, the original relish remains a taste of authenticity. Cranberry orange relish with walnuts was more than a condiment. It was the sparkle of Thanksgiving, brightening every plate it touched. Using a special apron saved for occasions was one of Grandma's small but sentimental traditions, something she treated with quiet care. The apron hung in the pantry all year, untouched except for holidays. When she tied it around her waist on Thanksgiving morning, it felt like the day had officially begun. The fabric was worn in places, soft from years of use, but still beautiful in the way cherished things always are. She wore it proudly as she moved through the kitchen, a symbol of celebration woven into something ordinary. It was a reminder that holidays deserved a little ceremony, even in the smallest details. Hummingbird cake was once a Thanksgiving showstopper, a towering southern dessert packed with banana, pineapple, and toasted nuts that made the whole room go quiet with the first slice. It tasted like sunshine and warmth even on the coldest holiday morning. Families made it because it felt generous, full of ingredients you saved for special occasions. The batter was thick and fragrant, spiced just enough to feel festive, and the cream cheese frosting wrapped everything in a soft, tangy sweetness. Every layer tasted like celebration. For years, it stood proudly among pies on Thanksgiving buffets, especially in the Deep South, where hospitality meant feeding people with your best. Over time, though, it slipped into birthday parties and spring gatherings instead, pushed aside by pumpkin pies and chocolate desserts that dominated holiday tables. But those who grew up with hummingbird cake remember the joy of cutting into it, the way the fruit kept it moist for days, and how it felt like the dessert that understood the holiday best, abundant, warm, and made to share. A sweet memory worth keeping alive. Baking a custard pie for the elders was one of those gestures Grandma made quietly, with a sense of respect that never needed to be spoken out loud. She knew the older relatives looked forward to that soft, simple dessert more than anything else on the table. While everyone else fussed over pumpkin and pecan, the custard pie sat in the oven, thickening slowly, its surface turning smooth and golden. She whisked the filling gently, poured it carefully, and baked it with a patience she rarely needed for any other dish. It was delicate, subtle, and comforting in a way younger people often overlooked. When she sliced it, the texture was velvety and warm, a reminder of earlier times when desserts were made from whatever ingredients were available. The elders always thanked her with a look that said more than words ever could. That pie was her tribute to them, a dessert that honored their memories and their place at the table. Let's dig into 30 lost Christmas desserts America completely forgot. Fruitcake with Suet was once the undisputed king of Christmas desserts, baked weeks in advance and aged like fine wine in American pantries. The recipe called for beef suet, hard fat from around the kidneys, which gave the cake an incomparably moist texture that butter could not replicate. Dried fruits were soaked in brandy for days before being folded into dense batter, heavy with molasses and spices. The cakes were wrapped in cheesecloth soaked in spirits and stored in cool cellars, developing deeper flavor each week. Families served thin slices alongside coffee after Christmas dinner, the richness demanding moderation. The Suet kept the cake fresh for months, practical for households without reliable refrigeration. Children wrinkled their noses at the dense texture, but adults understood this was celebration food meant to last. Today, fruitcake survives mostly as a punchline, but the Suet-laden original was magnificent. Date nut roll was the kind of dessert that made children hover anxiously around the kitchen, waiting for the moment it was sliced. It was not a pie or a cake, but a refrigerator candy, rolled by hand and packed with sweet dates, nuts, and just enough cookie crumbs to hold everything together. Families made it weeks before the holiday, storing it away in wax paper like treasure hidden in the back of the fridge. When you sliced it, the spirals of sticky fruit and crunchy nuts made every piece look like a tiny stained glass window, and the taste was just as memorable. It was sweet without being overwhelming, rich without being heavy, and easy to stretch for a crowd when money was tight. Making it was a labor of love, requiring time and patience that people no longer make space for. As store-bought candy boxes and pre-made sweets filled the shelves, the roll faded away, seen as too old-fashioned or too fiddly for modern kitchens, but back then it symbolized celebration, care, and the quiet excitement of a holiday dessert pulled from a cold shelf on a chilly evening. A little forgotten, maybe, but never undeserving of its place at the table. Snow pudding with custard sauce brought elegance to Victorian Christmas tables with its cloud-like texture and golden accompaniment. The pudding was made from gelatin, sugar, lemon juice, and stiffly beaten egg whites, creating something ethereal and trembling. It arrived at the table pure white and shimmering, often molded into decorative shapes that showcased the cook's skill. The custard sauce, rich with egg yolks and vanilla, provided warmth and richness against the cold, airy pudding. This combination of textures, soft, cold, light against warm, smooth, rich, made every spoonful a revelation. Families considered it sophisticated enough for company, yet simple enough for Christmas Eve supper. The dessert required careful timing, the gelatin needing to set properly before unmolding. Children adored the wobbling presentation, while adults appreciated the delicate balance of flavors. Snow pudding vanished as instant desserts replaced homemade gelatin creations, taking its quiet elegance with it. Which forgotten Christmas dessert brings back your sweetest memories? Drop it in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe so we can keep uncovering the holiday traditions time almost forgot.